going to talk about databases for a few minutes because I love databases and we don't talk about them enough. Especially when we think about DevOps. We talk about applications, we even talk about our teams and our organizations, but we often neglect the database, right? So there are things that we care about in our database that are worth monitoring. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we care about and why. So when we start monitoring, the first thing that we look at is that databases are a really good sort of indicator of system health. If something is wrong in your database, chances are that there are ripples going through your whole system, right? And when things are going wrong, one, you want to know, and two, this gives you a really good place to start. If you already have metrics in place, then guess what? You can investigate starting with the metrics you already have in your database. So this sounds great, right? Congratulations, you did it. But there's one problem, which is that databases have a lot of metrics. If you were Scrooge McDuck, you could swim through them. If it was Wrestlemania, they'd be folding chairs. Like, there's a lot of them. So how do we decide which ones really matter? So I always start with throughput. Throughput is basic traffic, right? It's just queries, reads and writes. It's a little bit simple, but it gives us an idea of how our database is starting to spend its time and on what kind of traffic. We also call these questions and queries, server-side and client-side requests. This is starting to give us a picture of how our database spends its time, but it's not all of it, right? We have to add more metrics. So the second thing we care about is execution time. How long does the database spend doing its job? How long does it take to complete it? Now, in your application, a slow query could mean 1 second. It could also be 0.0001 seconds. In MySQL, it's 10 seconds. Ugh. But the good news is that slow is relative, and you know what your application needs, right? And there's a bit of a slippery slope for optimization here, because monitoring execution time is not the same thing as improving execution time. So just because you can improve it doesn't mean that's how you should sort of prioritize. So just ask yourself how you're spending your time as you're instrumenting. Third, we care about concurrency. How many jobs is the database doing at once? So if it receives 10 requests and they each take 10 seconds, does that mean the database is busy for 100 seconds or 10 seconds in which it handles all of the requests? Because basically, this uses a different type of resources in our database. It's busy in a different way. And we have to consider new types of metrics when it's handling multiple tasks at the same time. We have to think about things like the number of threads and the number of connections. And as we put all of these metrics together, we begin to get a picture of the thing that we really care about in our database, which is actually called utilization. What percentage of the time was the database available? If I send a request to the database, what happens if it's too busy to respond? This is generally the thing that we care the most about because we want success from our databases, right? We don't want any of the users to ever get an error or maybe a timeout. And sometimes even worse for me is that sometimes you do get a response, but the data is just a little bit different than you expect, right? So we start to see that this can be a big problem. But I have some good news. Because all of this work, it's already been done. Those are my dogs. I love them. Databases have internal performance databases. They're databases you can already query where this data exists. So you can find these aggregates, right? In Postgres, it's pgstats. In InfluxDB, hey, that's where I work. It's _internal. Because the point of DevOps, right, is that we can spend our time doing what we're best at. And we're not the experts, right? Our job is to learn and communicate with the tools that we have at our disposal. Maybe for you, that's writing code, or managing your CI/CD pipeline, or working for any number of the really interesting corporations I've seen today. But for me, I spend my time thinking about, well, database metrics that matter.